Sorry?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Come on, guys, we just had food. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good job, sister. I'm going to try to do my best, Sheikh, so please forgive me. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker today. MashaAllah, he gave a very good khutbah. We have today Sheikh Vajid Pathan from West Virginia. His khutbah today was on Fir'aun's legacy in today's media. And tonight he'll be talking about prophetic parenting and family lessons from Yusuf alayhi salam and Musa alayhi salam. Sheikh Vajid Pathan, mashallah, he's a graduate of Medina University. He studied there for 6 years, specializing in fiqh and usul al-fiqh. And currently he's doing his master's in family therapy. But without further ado, I'd like to pass it on to Sheikh Vajid.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Alhamdulillah, thank you all for joining us tonight. The choice of the topic, speaking about Musa alayhi salam and Yusuf alayhi salam and extracting lessons from their life, was brought on from the fact, how I mentioned today in the khutbah, that this is the month of Muharram. And in this being the month of Muharram, we remember a lot about Musa alayhi salam and his trials that he went through. And when remembering Musa alayhi salam, you have to remember what his family went through. And that extends not only to his mother and his siblings, and to his larger family, the other Bani Israel, but to his ancestors as well. And who are his ancestors? Yusuf alayhi salam. You go back to Yusuf alayhi salam. So just to kind of set the stage for our talk, I'm going to give a very quick, very point by point introduction into the lives of these two prophets. And so much more could be said, but for the purpose of today's class, for today's talk, we'll just talk about the most important aspects of their lives. Yusuf alayhi salam, he was born to his father who had 11 other children. So he had 11 siblings and they were 12 altogether living in Palestine. Because of this problem that the other siblings had, this jealousy, they essentially wanted to get rid of him. As a result, they threw him into the well. Many of us are familiar with the story. One thing led to another. Him being in Palestine eventually led up to him being sold as a slave in Egypt. While he was in Egypt, he then had to go through many turmoils, many tests, many difficulties. Right? He had the most difficult test of being in an improper relationship. Someone wanted to be in an improper relationship with him. Then as a result of that, he was put into prison. Then much later on, he would be released from prison. And the conclusion of that story would be, he would be raised as a finance minister of Egypt. And the gift that Allah would give him, that gift of being able to interpret dreams, would ultimately lead to saving Egypt from essentially being cleaned out. There was a drought that was going to come. And preserving the reserves of food and other things helped them survive during the years of drought. Much later on, after he became settled in that position and he was a grown man, Yusuf alayhi salam was visited by a group, by a caravan from Palestine. This group were his brothers. He recognized them, but they didn't recognize him. So one thing led to another, and eventually at the end of the story, he would invite all of them to move from Palestine and come to Egypt to live with him. He would have his parents there and his brothers living with him, and they would live in luxury as he was the finance minister. After this, many years would go by where those 12 kids of Yaqub alayhi salam, Yusuf alayhi salam and his brothers, would have children, and they would grow as a large family. And they would have those kids would have many cousins. And the family would continuously grow. Until a point came many years later where they would be overtaken by a group of invaders. These invaders, they called their leaders pharaohs. And this is where Fir'aun would enter into the picture. And each king or ruler in their dynasty or in their empire, whatever you want to call it, was called a pharaoh. Now, during the time of Musa alayhi salam, the year that he was born, Musa alayhi salam's mother was extremely frightened. The reason why is because Pharaoh had gotten some kind of dream or interpretation that a child from Bani Israel, the group of people that he had enslaved, were going to overtake him. One boy was going to overtake him and destroy his kingdom, destroy his power. So he killed off the boys, some scholars say as far as every other year, to control their population so that they couldn't, grow in strength, come together and kill him or defeat him. Now, a lot of things happened in Musa alayhi salam's story, and just for brevity, Musa alayhi salam grew up in the house of Fir'aun. Much later on in his life, he would end up killing somebody by accident, and he would have to flee, he would have to run away. Once he ran away, he would be gone for 10 years. Then he would come back because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him to. He would come to Fir'aun and he would talk about setting them free, like we talked about in the khutbah today. And the entire conversation with him was one meeting. Then after that, they ran away. They left because the people who supported Musa alayhi salam were all targets of Pharaoh and his army. And they ran all the way to the sea. And at this point, Musa alayhi salam and his followers were cornered and they had absolutely nothing left. They thought that they were going to be destroyed. Musa alayhi salam himself, he was worried, and his followers, they said, we're going to be destroyed. So Musa alayhi salam, he said, no, indeed, my Lord, He's with me, He will guide me. Inna Rabbi ma'ya sayahdi. He will guide me, He's with me. So from that, he took his staff, he struck the sea, and it parted. And as a result, they were able to cross into the next sea, into the next land. And when Pharaoh and his army followed, they were engulfed by the water, and then they were all killed. And Musa alayhi salam and all of Bani Israel were now free. So all of this is a full circle from Yusuf alayhi salam's beginning until Musa alayhi salam's end. And eventually they would end up in the same place that Yusuf alayhi salam left from. Although Musa alayhi salam didn't actually get that opportunity himself. Now, the purpose of today's talk is actually to extract lessons that we can learn from as families from these two stories. So we talked about the media today in the khutbah. And no story is more mentioned in the Quran than the story of Musa alayhi salam, because you can exhaust yourself studying the story and still find lessons. So what lessons can we extract from these two stories, either from one of them or from both of them, that can help us in our life in terms of our relationship with our family members? Because there are a lot of things to contrast between the two stories, and there are a lot of similarities. And at the end of the day, there are a lot of lessons. So let's start. One main similarity between the story is that Musa alayhi salam and Yusuf alayhi salam, they both had siblings. Yusuf had 11, and Musa alayhi salam had 2. Now the big contrast here, especially for parents, and then for the siblings and for the kids themselves to kind of think about, is the lesson that's kind of extracted from the back end of this. Siblings can either be a source of removing that one child from the family, or can be a source of bringing that child back to the family. In the case of Yusuf alayhi salam, which is very clear, the 11 brothers or the 10 brothers were very jealous of Yusuf alayhi salam. Because of the jealousy, it overtook them, and they wanted to get rid of him. In doing so, they said, let's go play with him. Well, they asked their dad for permission, let us go and play with him. And then what happened? He disappeared from his father for probably 40 years. That was the last time his dad saw him, for 40 years. Now contrast that with Musa alayhi salam. Musa alayhi salam was, when he was born, that was the year that Fir'aun had his army walking around the streets killing babies. And the mother heard the footsteps of the soldiers. And she became extremely scared. In that fear, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave her this way of relaxation. Told her what to do. And we'll get to exactly what she told her to do. And after that, she took him and put him into the river. She put him into the basket, into the river, and he just started to float away. Now the mother cannot follow the child, otherwise the army is going to know exactly what's happening. So she told her daughter, Musa alayhi salam's sister, وَقَالَتْ لِأُخْتِهِ قُصِّي, Go and follow him. Go and follow him. فَبَصُرَتْ بِهِ عَنْ جُنُبٍ وَهُمْ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ. She kept walking on the sides of the bank, of the river bank, keeping an eye from the side of her eye, so that she wouldn't get caught. Imagine that now. What ended up happening? When Musa alayhi salam finally reached the end of that river, or when he finally stopped floating in that river, he was found by Asiya, the wife of Pharaoh, who said, let's take this as our own child. They brought all of the possible wet nurses to feed this baby who was crying. And like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, He made that milk haram for Musa alayhi salam. Meaning, it's a very elaborate way of saying, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't allow Musa alayhi salam to drink anyone's milk. And his sister was right there the entire time. As soon as she found the opportunity, she went there and said, oh, I know somebody who's also breastfeeding. Let me go and call her. This is this person. She had a child last year, and therefore she's still nursing. Harun, Musa alayhi salam's older brother. So she was the reason that they came back together. So as parents, what's the lesson in this? The relationship between the siblings are extremely, extremely important. Extremely important. You can't dismiss that. Children should not be independent of one another. Siblings should not be independent of one another. Their relationship is extremely important. Their bond is extremely important. And long term in their life, that relationship might be the most important relationship that they have. Because at the end of the day, that blood relationship will always be more stable and more trustworthy than any other relationship. That relationship of blood can never be broken by any means. It can never be broken. Every other relationship can be broken. A friendship is a voluntary relationship that we, enact with one another. I want to be your friend. You want to be my friend. Okay. And then what? Something happens between us and we stop talking forever. But there was nothing that was underlying between us. Even for husband and wife, it's a contract at the end of the day. So if a serious issue happens between husband and wife, that leads to divorce. After divorce, what happens? You go your separate ways. But for siblings, for blood relationships, it's always tied to blood. That can never be broken. So that leads me to my second point. For parents, you cannot show favoritism to one child over the other. In the story of Yaqub alayhi salam, we learned this explicitly because the children got jealous and they did what they did. And it's not excusable, and you can't blame Yaqub alayhi salam for what happened. But every child has to be treated in a fair and just manner. And just does not mean that, for example, if you're giving the 25-year-old college graduate a car, that you're giving the 10-year-old a car as well. That's not justice. That's not what fair means. But fair and just means consistency throughout children. It's consistency. But now contrast that with Musa alayhi salam. In Musa's case, what happened? One child needed the attention because he was in danger. So everyone else in the family had to focus their attention on that child. Musa alayhi salam's mother had to set aside, she was feeding him and had to set aside and had to step back. She couldn't do anything once he was put in the river. Then the daughter, who was still a young child by the way, had to completely take over that role. And sometimes that's what's needed in families. And that has to be temporary. That has to be temporary. Children should not make them feel, when this is the situation, when there is a crisis situation, when there is an issue such as having to deal with an issue or a child who is the center of attention, that the other child will never receive attention. Attention is extremely important. So that kind of ties up that point. Between that relationship of siblings, that relationship, that bond has to be honored and nurtured in order for it to flourish. The next point I want to mention is about rizq. It's a very interesting contrast in the story. How Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows how rizq is brought into the family. When Musa alayhi salam was a child, and in this case he was a baby, he says, وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَىٰ أُمِّ مُوسَىٰ أَنْ أَرْضِعِيهِ. Talking about how Musa alayhi salam was nursed and given milk. And this food being given to the baby is a form of rizq. Parents, and the lesson here is that parents give children rizq. And sometimes when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the Razzaq, as the one who gives us that sustenance and nurturing, it's through the parents sometimes. But there's also a switch that happens. There's also a switch that happens. In the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, in the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, at the end of the life, what happened? At the end of the story, what happened? All of the children left from Palestine and they went to Egypt for the purpose of trading. Yaqub alayhi salam was not the one who was going out for trading anymore. He was going, the children, the 11 kids were going out for the purpose of trading, so that they can get the food and they can go back and they can feed their father. Rizq can come from the children and it can come from the parents. Contributing to the family can be something that's a shared task or responsibility. And it can look different for different families, and that's okay. People did contribute in different ways, right? There's no expectation that a 5-year-old is contributing in a financial way to the family. And for the children of parents who are starting to get older as well, there should be an expectation that you are now going to start taking care of your parents as they took care of you when you were younger. This is the normal cycle of life. The next point that I want to mention, and this is something very important as well, this is a very, very powerful lesson. You can expect turbulence in families, specifically when children are getting to an age of maturity, specifically during that time. In both stories with Yusuf alayhi salam and Musa alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَمَا بَلَغَ أَشُدَّهُ. When both of them reached the specific age, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gave them knowledge and wisdom. And then immediately after He mentions this ayah, in both stories, He mentions the fitna that happened. In Musa's case, the killing. And then Yusuf alayhi salam's story, the seduction. it's going to happen that the older kids get, more problems might start to arise. And that's okay. It's a normal cycle of life. It's a normal cycle of life. That's what happens. That's a learning process. But what is the proper response as parents? What is our normal response? What did Yaqub alayhi salam do? Yaqub alayhi salam, he knew what his children had done. Or he had very strong intuition. And Yusuf alayhi salam was gone, like I said, for decades. And when they came back and they said, he's gone, that's it, no more Yusuf alayhi salam. He said, I have nothing else to do other than فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ. I can only have beautiful patience. And he never excommunicated them. He never kicked them out. He never beat them. Right? He always maintained his relationship. Even though he felt this extreme loss for them. Even the second time that it happened, where he thought he lost his second son, Binyamin, he said the exact same phrase. And still he had patience, hoping that they were going to come back to the path of Allah. Hoping. And that is what our responsibility as parents are. Our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very, very important. It's extremely important. Right? And that relationship with Allah, our personal relationship with Allah, our personal spiritual connection with Allah will have an effect on our other family members, especially our children. And how do we know that? How do we know that? In the story of Musa alayhi salam, very, very powerful. At the very end of Surah Tahrim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that Asiya used to make a dua. Asiya, the wife of Pharaoh, she used to make a dua, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect her from Pharaoh. And she would say, نجني من فرعون وعمله ونجني من القوم الظالمين. She would say, نجني من القوم الظالمين. Protect me from the wrongdoing people, or save me from the wrongdoing people. Now, Musa alayhi salam grew up as a baby. From the time he was a baby, grew up in the house of Asiya. Pharaoh is going to be out doing all of his work, all of the job, whatever he needs to do. And from the time that Yusuf alayhi salam was there, he established deen. He established deen because he is the great grandson of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So everyone knew who Allah was, right? So religiosity was already present. But Pharaoh, he rejected. He thought he was God. And he was a very bad person. So Asiya would make this dua, protect me from Pharaoh and his actions, which makes sense. And then she would make this dua, Rabbi, وَنَجِّنِي مِنَ الْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ. Much, much, much later on, when Musa alayhi salam was a grown man, he was strong, he was extremely well built. He saw two people fighting and he accidentally killed one person in order to save another person. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says that he became extremely scared when that happened because he thought he was going to die. After this, things kind of settled down until another person came to him and said, they're coming to kill you, run away. As soon as he said that, Musa alayhi salam, he made a dua. He said the same thing that his adopted mother used to say. قَالَ رَبِّ نَجِّنِي مِنَ الْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ. What is the lesson here? Musa alayhi salam was not a prophet at this time. His prophethood, his communication with Allah came when? After he left from Egypt, after he went to Madian, after he got married and stayed there for 10 years, and he was finally leaving from there. That's when he spoke to Allah. So more than 10 years after this, he would become a prophet. At this point in his life, the most scariest time where he thought he was going to be killed by the army as punishment for what he just did, what did he have to fall back on? The dua that his mother used to make and he used to hear. What a powerful sentiment. The dua of our parents and the relationship that the parents have is something that can be ingrained into the children. How much time do I have left? Okay. So I just want to make two more points. One is contrasting a very important relationship. This is, children are typically much smarter than we give them credit for. Children are typically much smarter than what we give them credit for. If we go through the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, and even the story of Musa alayhi salam with what his sister did, we'll see how intelligent they were, how street smart they were. Musa alayhi salam's brothers, they had it in a response for every single thing that could have been said. They said, their dad said, I'm afraid he's going to be eaten by a wolf. So he said, when they came to him, they said, he was eaten by a wolf. They came exactly at nighttime when they couldn't be seen properly, crying with fake tears because no tears were actually coming down their face. They said, we want to go out to play and run around and stuff like this, and giving an entire full story. Because if they didn't give that full story, there would be holes in the plot. And they covered all of their bases. So they were very intelligent. They were street smart in that sense. Musa alayhi salam's sister in the same way. She knew she couldn't just walk across the bank of the river watching the baby float away. So she was away at a distance, keeping an eye on it from the side of her eye. Children are intelligent. And just because of smartphones and the access to internet and social media, children are much smarter now. And they have the potential to even be more intelligent in some aspects than adults do. Or at least they know more about certain subjects than we do. And we have to understand and respect that. Take their opinion for things. Take their opinion for things. Ask them. Don't underestimate them. Don't think that they are dumb or that they can't contribute to the conversation. And at the same time, for the children, don't think that you're the smartest person in the world. Because you're still young. Even if you know how to do something on your phone, you lack the experience in life. And you know what experience in life brings? Intuition. Intuition is what saved Musa alayhi salam. Is how Allah gave that to his mother. وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَىٰ أُمِّ مُوسَى. Awhayna, wahi, in this sense, is intuition. That's something that's built through age, through ages, through experience. And what happened with Yaqub, with the father of Yusuf alayhi salam? He knew immediately that something was wrong. Not when they came back without Yusuf, when they asked to take him out. And then when they came back without him, he said, I knew that you did something, but I have no choice except to be patient. So parents have experience in life, and that should be respected. And just because they are saying no, 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 no all the time, it doesn't mean that they're trying to stop you from having a good time. The reason why they're doing that is because they have experience in certain fields. They have the strong intuition about something, and they're anticipating that something bad is going to happen, in anticipation that you are lacking. So then you can't sense that danger that's approaching. But they can. Like the foot soldiers that are coming to Musa's house. So they say no to you for that reason. Specifically for that reason. And the last point that I will make, give genuine love and empathy for your children. Give genuine love and empathy for your children. When Yusuf alayhi salam started off in this story, he went to his father and he said, Ya abati, Ya abati, oh my beloved father. And then he had an entire conversation with him. They expressed love. And then father responded to him and he said, Ya bunay. What was that interaction like? When the son wanted to speak to his father, he stopped what he was doing and he gave him time. He gave him attention. And that's what's needed. Time and attention and space to sit down, to listen attentively and be present in that conversation. Otherwise, what happens? Children will come at a young age, from a young age they'll come and they'll say, hey, all of this happened. Remember that time when children are young and they're so excited to share all the smallest details. And then something happens over time where that just stops. Why does it stop? Could it be because we stopped caring or stopped giving them that attention? So they realize that they're not important or that you don't care? So they stopped sharing? So what happens to that need of sharing that information? It goes to people who do care. Their friends and other people. And you cannot control who the other people will be. So if you create and maintain a space where they can always come to you, then that will be a very positive thing, because they'll always trust that you can listen. And for the children, don't anticipate a punishment. Don't anticipate something bad happening if you go to your parents to talk to them. Just go and do it. You might be surprised at the wisdom that they have. You might be surprised at the solution that they give you. Go ahead and just talk to them. Open up and get their advice. You have no idea how much of a benefit it can be. Remember, if you want, for just to kind of solidify this point really quickly, a very common issue that happens in marriages, and this is an issue between husbands and wives, is that the wife will ask the husband, what's wrong? And the husband doesn't share. So the husband, he says nothing. And the wife will say over and over again, what's wrong with it? I know something is wrong. And eventually, because it's a repetitive questions, or it seems like the wife really wants to know, the husband will say, oh, okay, it's because you did this or something and it upset me. So as a result of sharing his feelings, the husband ends up getting in trouble. That happens. And that happens a lot. But it only happens a few times. Why does it only happen a few times? Because once it happens and that husband gets into trouble, he learns his lesson. And he says, if I'm just going to get into trouble anyway, what's the point of sharing? What's the point? Let me just keep my opinions to myself. The exact same dynamic plays out in children. The exact same way. So the more space that we give for children, and inshallah for husbands as well, to talk about the way that they feel without that judgment and just listening attentively, it will help our relationship so much more significantly. هذا وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Inshallah, we'll take some questions.
Assalamu alaikum. Any questions? Please raise your hands. We probably have a time only for 3 questions, so Just want to wrap up in next 5-10 minutes. Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Wajid. I have a question around social media, right? The kids are always like, when you're talking to parents, they're on the phone, all the distractions that come with social media, right? TikTok, Instagram. What would be your recommendation to the children to make sure that they're attentive and they spend quality time with parents when they're around without any distraction?
So it's important to understand how we got to where we got to in order to address this effectively. And that is, a lot of the times what happens is because of our busy schedules as parents, we sometimes give the phone, social media, and these appliances, instruments to our children to kind of bide their time. So this is what they learn as a way of kind of spending their time. And it needs to be understood, social media and using our phones has to be understood in the same context as an addiction, in the same way. So in order to get through an addiction, what do? You need a substitute. You need some kind of coping mechanism that will alter and put something else in its place. So parents that want to give more attention to their parents that want their kids to not be on their phone the entire time and want to do something else, it's a very easy way to kind of mediate that and mitigate that. Spend time together as a family doing something that they want to do. Even if it is something virtual like playing a video game with the kids, if it's not on the phone independently, individually by themselves, and you are participating, it will be one step closer to getting them away from independently using their phone by themselves and interacting more as a family. And what that will lead to is eventually you being together and maybe playing games together, maybe going outside and eating dinner together, stuff like that. So spending time away from social media, the first step is going to be giving them an alternative together as a family.
Jazakallah. I have one more question. So, mashallah, you share the two stories, like Yusuf al-Islam and the Musa al-Islam. So, in one case, we have the strong bonding between siblings. And in one case, we have the jealousy and hatred. And so what we can do, like as parents, so to cultivate that mindset where the siblings love each other.
MashaAllah, that's a very good question. And each family is going to be different in this respect. So we're not going to have an exact list of things that we can do. And we have more don'ts than do's in this regard. Things that are going to push and isolate children are negatives that we want to avoid. And things that are community building techniques, things that are networking techniques that adults would use are the same techniques that work for children as well. So group exercises for kids, talking to the kids in a way that elevates them and their sibling to the same level, as opposed to you being the parent telling the child, I can't deal with you right now, I need to focus on this on this child. Isolating one child over the other, or preferring one child over the other. These kinds of things isolate children, alienate them, and make them feel like they're less than. So what we want to do to cultivate that bond is to make them feel like they are loved together, that they are equally important, and that bond is important, and that both of them matter to the parent. From that, we build up a connection with them, and then they do things together, just like how friends or community members will do things together. Activities, playing, all of these kinds of things, in order to establish and kind of strengthen that relationship.
Jazakallah. Inshallah, we'll wrap up because we have a prayer time. Obviously, our Imam is here for this weekend. And if you have any question, feel free to really discuss with him offline.
Jazakallah khair. And we would like to thanks again our Imam to visiting us, and Jazakallah khair. May Allah bless you and your family. Yes.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله